Okay, so I want to welcome you guys. I'm excited. I'm going to do a quick session tonight. This is going to be how to take your 3D artist career to the next level. So by the end of the session, I want us to all have a pretty clear idea about how to really become strategic with our jobs and the places we work as well as how to leverage every project that we take on to the fullest as well, and maximize our career, our job offers, and really kind of level up overall with everything that we're doing. So just a quick introduction, if you just stumbled along this, I've been working as an artist for nearly 25 years in the 3D industry. So I've worked at Industrial Light and Magic and many other big and small studios as well. So I've worked on projects like Avengers, Superman, Star Trek, Transformers, Game of Thrones, Call of Duty, Black Ops, Destiny, Halo, and a lot of other projects too. So just a couple of things I want to quickly talk about. I've been doing these as a live stream the last couple of days, primarily on YouTube, and tonight I'm doing one on Instagram as well. So what's up, everyone? So in general, I'm going to start doing these every single day. I'm going to leave the Q&A to the very end, and I'll try to get into that. And in general, I'll start to pick up the pace with these a lot more. But this one, I'm going to intentionally try to keep it around 20 minutes. In general, they've gone a lot longer, but that's just because I'm trying to throw as much information as I can at you guys. But we'll do a Q&A at the very end. One thing I'll mention is I'm going to be putting out a lot of these daily. So if you're not on my YouTube channel, if you can subscribe to that, you'll get updates about this stuff. On top of that, I'm going to be putting out some Tyflow tutorials for the next couple of days, as well as a lot of other really good stuff. So lots of stuff coming, primarily on my YouTube, as well as I'll try to link to it on my Facebook and Instagram too. So that's the main thing. The last thing I mentioned it the other day, but right now I've got a free live action visual effects class. You can check it out at vfxcourse.com. So this is an 8-video class that goes through how to take a live action visual effects shot from start to finish, includes all the 3D assets, the footage, everything you need to do a complete Hollywood visual effects shot. So I wanted to mention that because it's only available for a little bit longer, but you go to vfxcourse.com. If one of you can link to that in the comments, that'd be really great. That being said, let's dive into this. And like I said, I'll do a Q&A at the very end, but feel free to leave as many comments as you like, and that way, we've got a truckload of stuff to dig into. So feel free to keep them coming through as we go. So like I said, with this, I want to really focus on how we can level up our career, like what we can do to, let's say, at an intermediate level, because a lot of what I've talked about so far is how to leverage and break into the industry. Then I talked about branding yesterday, but with this, I want to take it a step further, and that is that if you've been working in the creative industry, whether that's games, design, film, the main thing is that for a lot of us, we initially focus and put all of our attention into how to get that first job. That's usually where we put in the blood, sweat, and tears. Like we're really ready to quit at the very beginning. And we tend to get a lot more strategic because we're doing whatever we can to get in, to get accepted, to make it, as we would put it. And the thing is that for most of us, once we get in, that's where we really stop trying. That's where we think that we got through the first barrier and it's all smooth sailing from there. So usually from there, we tend to kind of set adrift and kind of float around rather than being a lot more strategic with what we're doing. So I think the key thing for a lot of us is to look at that as the second phase. Like, what can we do once phase one is complete? Like, once we've gotten in, that isn't the end. That's only the beginning. So I think for a lot of us, we need to really see that as, great, I got a job, now what? Rather than looking at, yay, I got a job, now I just can sit back and enjoy it, drink all the free cola and eat all the late night pizza as I can. And instead start to look at, how I can be strategic in leveling it up and continuing to grow beyond there. So I think for that being the key thing, that most of us don't get strategic. We just tend to to let everyone else guide our career. And I've talked about this a lot about being, a lot of people are more responsive in the sense that they're reactive. They don't tend to take charge with their career. So if I look at my career, if I look at the very beginning, when I first got in, I had a lot of traction. I got in, and initially I was working day and night. I moved to a house closer to the studio I was working at purely so I could use their render farm when they weren't around. It meant that I was a 3-minute bike ride through this like graveyard. It was kind of creepy, like 3 or 4 in the morning coming home, having to go through there, and I'd ride there every day and come back at nighttime and continue to use the render farm. I took full advantage of that, and it meant that every single day I would work my butt off and I would do the best work I could. When everyone left, I would shift phases and I would start to work on my own stuff. I would start to put stuff online, and this is back in like 99, 2000. But for me, it was just like I'd constantly just continue to publish work and show off what I can do, learn new things, try new things, and use the render farm whenever it was dead. Whenever it got to like 2 in the morning, that's when Allan stuff would kick in. That's when all my renders would start happening. And I was always excited to come in the morning and see what I had done and try and make it better and better and better. There'd be times where the security would call, because the place is unlocked at 3 in the morning, and that's because I'd be there working on my dynamic sims. And I think about that. I think about actually, there's like one crappy example I did back in the day, and I remember actually security kept calling saying, are you still there? And I'm like, yeah, 1 more hour. And it's because I was wrestling with Reactor in 3ds Max trying to get this dynamic sim to happen. And I remember that particular thing because I remember being at Blur Studio like 5 years later, like the place that I always wanted to work. And I remember being on the network one day, kind of fiddling around, going through all the reference folders that they have. And I found this folder with like all of that work that I had done over that time, all the late nights that I put in Sydney, Australia when I was 17, 18, publishing all that online, more for myself than anyone else. I found that folder at Blur Studio in their reference network, and it's probably still there to this day. I know that there's a bunch of my courses pirated on their network, so there's definitely some stuff in there. And that was, to me, really mind-blowing to see that other people were paying attention. And the fact that if it's in their reference folder, then somebody, if not a lot of people, were inspired by that. They were using that as their reference. And so just because I'm there working and doing all this stuff doesn't mean that it's not capturing the attention of other people. And I think for all of us, like I said, and for those of you just getting in, I want to really focus on how to leverage and target a lot of the jobs that we do and how to really kind of take our career to the next level. So, when it comes to that career, I got a lot of success. I started as a junior artist at that studio. By the time I left, I went, at 19 years old, I left to go to another studio as a senior technical director. So within that year and a half that I was there, I managed to get a lot of experience and really move up quite drastically in my career. And I didn't do that just by showing up every day and doing what I was told. I did that by putting in the late hours, coming in early in the morning. Weekends, I would be taking advantage of their render farm. I'd be asking as many questions as I could without being annoying. I would do whatever it took to kind of continue to grow. And being around all these amazing people, it meant why not take advantage of that? So in the beginning, before we get in, we have that struggle. We're alone and we don't have anything to show. But I always say your first reel is a throwaway, because as soon as you get into the second job, as soon as you get into starting your career, that's when you should start to level everything up. That's where you throw out all your old crappy work that you made by yourself, and suddenly you're surrounded by all of this talent and the budget behind it, the schedule behind it, that you can actually go and make a really cool reel. And that second reel that I ever cut, I sent that to Blur as a joke, and I sent it to Blizzard as well. And I expected, maybe if I'm lucky, a rejection letter. And that's when Tim Miller emailed me. He's like, hey, we love your work. Can you come work for us? And I look at like that reel not being very good compared to what I can do today, but it was because I suddenly was around all these other people that we could put together amazing work and iterate as we go. So I always think working in commercials when you first start out, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but commercials is a great place at the beginning of your career because you can do a commercial every 2 weeks. So you can just iterate. You could have 20 new commercials a year, if not more. And the advantage of that is that you could have 20 new pieces for your reel. Hopefully 10 of them are really good. So again, the iteration, opposed to working at a big studio on one movie for 2 years or whatever it might be, like an animated feature, it's very much rapid fire, and I think you get a lot of growth while doing that too. So I always say to start out in commercials just because you'll get a lot quicker feedback with your career. You'll get challenged more, you get given different tasks. Commercials, it's not going to be always the same thing. I always think if you go work on Happy Feet, you're going to be doing snowflakes for 3 years. If you worked in commercials, you have 60 commercials in the same amount of time, all in different ways that challenge you and force you to grow. But on top of that, you have all of these different projects. So the thing is, by the end of doing that, I moved on to being a senior TD just at the age of 19, and I got a lot of success very quickly. The thing is, the first year and a half, I was just aggressive. I lived day and night, working my ass off, doing whatever I could to impress everyone around me. I was young, and for me, it was really important to just make the most of the time I had. But when I got into the next job, the senior TD job, that was where I just turned down working on the Matrix and all these other really cool projects because I wanted to go home. I wanted to go back to my home city. And I made this mistake of going to a place where I had a lot of responsibility. I worked on really cool projects, but I kind of got very lazy. I was working in Maya as the TD for the studio, and the challenge there kind of got less and less and less. I was working with talented people, a lot of people that I'm friends with today, but I wasn't around the people that really forced me to level up. And because of that, I definitely got stagnant. And if I look at this huge spike at the beginning of my career where I was working on so many different projects, I was trying to prove myself because I had people better than me that made me want to be better myself. Instead, I was around people that I loved hanging out with. It was really fun, but it definitely was a very Australian atmosphere. We just had fun, and it wasn't like there was anyone there saying, "Hey, Allan, like you could do better." And I think that a lot of us get in this situation where we get comfortable, and bit by bit, we start really thinking about like what's next. Instead of being in a city or a place that has lots of jobs and we're hanging out with lots of people and pushing each other, instead we kind of just treat it like a job and we go there every single day. And when that happens after a while, we start to look back at like, wow, holy crap, I'm now 23, 24, 30 years old, 40 years old. Like, where did the time go? And I've had spikes of that in my career, but I've seen it more importantly with so many other people that we get comfortable very quickly. So I remember, and I wanted to mention that because I think that it was a very important time in my career because I remember I got pretty insecure about ever getting a job. The people who were there definitely kind of made you stick to it. And so I had a few friends who were going on to work on Lord of the Rings and other projects. They're like, Allan, come on over. This would be so cool. And I was actually like, scared, like, well, what if I leave and I can't get another job? Like, suddenly I think we get that safety and security of like, we don't want to leave home. In other words, we don't want to leave that full-time job. And again, it's important to mention this because I think a lot of us, that's the kind of the glue that's holding us back, is that we're thinking too much of the what ifs. And the what ifs should be more about like, what other options are out there? I could be doing Lord of the Rings. I could be doing Hellboy. I could be doing all these cool other projects. But it takes getting out of your comfort zone to do that. And I've interviewed now hundreds of amazing, like the industry leaders in visual effects on my podcast. And for me, that's always been a thing that I've always asked them. Same way I ask my friends, like whenever they had that major win in their career, whenever they got to direct their first movie, or whenever they got to supervise, some massive project, I always say, like, was there a risk? Like, was there a big decision you had to make? And every single person had to do that. Like, they always smile at the same time, and they always think, yeah, like, I basically had to decide between, like, doing what was easy or doing something that was scary. And I chose the fucking scary route because that's what changed my life. I look back and it was that one time where I could have said, no, I'm going to take it easy, I'm going to keep it simple, or I could do this thing that's scary as shit, move to the other side of the world, or go freelance when, I've got a little bit of money saved up, but I don't know if this is going to work out. And I've talked about this before, but it's all about minimizing the risk while maximizing your opportunity. So I think that's really important for all of us to realize, like, are you stagnant in the place you're at right now? Like, did you have dreams before you started this? Like, what did you ultimately want to do? Did you want to go work at ILM? Did you want to make a short film? You can do all these things, but typically it means you got to get out of your comfort zone. And that doesn't mean you got to quit your job tomorrow. It might mean that you might need to do some extra weekends, or it might mean that you might need to take some time off here and there. One of my friends who's the animation supervisor for all of Weta, so he's in charge of every single movie that Weta does animation for. When he first was 21, 22, he decided he wanted to make a short film with his buddy, and he saved up the money. He approached his bosses. This was actually the studio I was at, and he said, hey, I want to make this short film. I love my job. I don't want to quit. Would you allow me to take 6 months unpaid to go make the short film, and then after that, come back to my job? And for them, it's win-win. It's like they don't lose someone that's, literally the most talented person at their studio, and at the same time, they're not paying for him to do it. So for him, he was able to do that knowing that he had the security to go back to his job. And that short film, it's funny, I was hanging out with some Pixar animators the other day, and it's like I was able to mention Cane Toad, this like Australian short film, and everyone knew what it was. It was this animated short film between Baz and Daz, and these two cane toads, and this whole thing is really comical, really fun, and I saw it win so many awards. It put them on the map. And then Andrew Silk, who was one of the animators, those two guys, he went on to be the animation supervisor for Happy Feet and all these other big projects at Animal Logic. Dave Clayton went on to Weta, and we never saw him again, except I saw him about 2 years ago at the Oscars when we all met up in Hollywood. So, that's just it, to see the growth you have and to think back to that one scary decision that you got to make. Whatever it is, you got to think about where your passion is and where maybe you derailed and you're kind of stagnant right now. So I want to hammer that home because I think for a lot of us, we got to ask ourselves that first, like, are we stagnant? Because I think for me, phase 3 of this, my third job was I went freelance, and there was Andrew Silk, the other animator, the Animal Logic supervisor. He was the one who was saying, Allan, you got to quit your job and go freelance. And I'm like, for the first time in my life, I was actually scared to do that. Whereas my entire career so far, I was never scared of that. I was always the one getting out there and hustling and doing all that. And suddenly I'm being insecure, questioning my worth, questioning my ability, and thinking of like all the scary things that could happen. And to fast track, living in Australia, in Brisbane, Australia, at the time there were, I'll say 1.5 studios, because like the other studio, Beeps, was not very good at all. So there's literally 1.5 studios doing visual effects in my entire city. And it's scary as hell. To fast forward, 4 weeks later, I was an effects lead in Hollywood working on a Dungeons and Dragons game cinematic, and then I went on to work on Blade, and I never looked back. And I look back at that one decision of scary as hell and deciding, you know what, I'll hustle, I'll make some calls, I'll make sure I've got options before I jump ship. And I'm not going to be stupid and just, jump to the wind and hope I get a job. But once I've lined up 1, 2, 3 things as options, I think I know I'm safe. Safe enough that as long as I'm checking in and making sure that, there's still offers out there, I'm making calls, doing lunches, doing whatever I can to keep on top, I think I'm going to be okay. And that was a critical thing for me to think about that I'd hate to think of where I would be today if I wasn't able to take that risk. And I always say you got to be out of your comfort zone 24/7 to make things happen. But that was the big deciding moment for me. I quit the job. I went to Sydney. I went back to the old studio I worked at. Worked there for 4 weeks on the first ever Scion car commercial, and that premiered in LA during Matrix 2. So it was one of the commercials that premiered at the very first night of Matrix 2 coming out of the theaters. The cool thing was, by the time Matrix 2 came out, I was in LA and I got to see it on the big screen. So to think that in 4 weeks I literally went from Nowhereville, Australia, to the other side of the planet, working in the city that I wanted. And even when I got there, it wasn't about like, great, I made it, I've got a job in LA, this is cool. For me, it meant, now what? And this is what I think we all got to start doing, is thinking in phases. We get a big win, that's awesome. Like, never ever undermine that, never downplay it. Always think like, when you get that big win, you got to pat yourself on the back and say, good fucking job, because it's so important to acknowledge how far we've come. But at the same time, we also got to think about, what's the next step? What's the next phase? Now that I'm here, how can I take full advantage of this? Now that I've worked on this new commercial I've spent 3 months on, or 3 weeks on, or 3 years on, when you finish that thing, how can you leverage that? How can you use that to better your career? In other words, when you work on the next feature film that you do, use it as a chance to email some studios and say, hey, how's it going? I'm not looking for a job right now. I just wanted to reach out because I love your work. I just finished the new Avengers Endgame, and I thought I'd just check in with you guys and see what projects you have coming up. I thought this would be a great chance to reach out now that I have a bit of downtime, if you ever want to do lunch. However you want to word it. Like, I think for a lot of us, we have this thing. Like I've noticed in a few of these live streams, like people say that's it, like that's all you got to do, and it's yeah, like treat people like a human being. If you reach out and say, hey, how's it going? Especially when you're demonstrating value or authority, in chances like this where, let's say you have a big win, that's when you ask for the pay rise. You don't ask for the pay rise when they're giving you your warning that you're on thin ice. Whenever you're getting that traction, you leverage that and you multiply that. So I always think about that, how I can leverage whatever I've done. So when I get that big win, now what? So maybe I can contact a magazine and say, hey, I just did this thing. If you like, I could write a quick article on it. That could be really cool because that way people see your name in 3D World magazine or Animation Mag or whatever it might be, and they become familiar with who you are, and you might get more offers because of that. People are like, hey, I love that thing you did. One of my buddies in Seattle, I say my buddy because I've only known him for a few months, but I knew of him because when Gollum was made for Lord of the Rings, I kept hearing about Bay Rate here, Bay Rate here. Jason Schaefer and him, their names were everywhere because they were responsible for creating Gollum. So fast forward almost 20 years later, I know who Bay Rate is because of Gollum. I ended up looking him up saying, hey, we should do a podcast together, and became friends. So think about that. Think about the wins you have. He makes Gollum. Why not get some PR about it? Then it's Gollum for the rest of your life. Like you never know like the traction you can get. I talked about this yesterday with branding that I did God of War, and that got me Avengers Endgame. All the ashing stuff that you're familiar with. And God of War was because of Blade. Blade wouldn't have happened if I didn't quit that job and a few weeks later go to LA. So all of this is a chain reaction, but it also means when people associate you with that thing, they're going to likely hire you when they need it. In my mentorship, I show off a lot of the artists' work that they're doing, and I'm really proud of the work they're doing. The cool thing is that I'm posting that stuff on Instagram all the time. You guys have probably seen it. I get so many messages. I get emails from Autodesk saying, who is that who did that piece? I'm like, oh, I'll put you in contact with them. And next thing I know, I'm getting calls from Autodesk saying, the CEO is doing a talk right now, and they've got in the background your student's piece of work. And you can just see the traction that's happening just because something got posted wherever, and someone liked it, and suddenly it blows up. One of my buddies, Justin Leduc, he did that Grim Reaper hanging over the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm sure you guys saw it. He went from 12,000 followers on Instagram to 600 and something thousand followers literally in a week. And you got to think like, if everyone knows that piece, and then you're like that guy or that girl who did it, that's going to blow up your name. Okay, so in other words, do you think that person is going to have problems necessarily looking for work if they're able to say, I did that piece? People at least know who they are, that you've caught their attention. Now you can take that and leverage it more. You can say, okay, cool, now I have your attention, now I've stood out from the noise, here's my reel or whatever that maybe you couldn't have done before. One of my friends at Pixar, he did the Alien song. I think some of you guys might be too young to recognize that, but he animated this alien, which became like one of the first viral videos on the internet, way before virality was a thing. And again, it's because he wanted to create a show reel. He made this video, put it up online, and people would do what they did back in the 90s. They emailed it around everyone. And suddenly he had, God, I'm going brain dead all of a sudden. Sorry about that. Ed Catmull from Pixar contact him. So the president of Pixar reached out to him saying, love your work, do you want to come work at Pixar? Like, how amazing is that? And that's because he leveraged it. Instead of just sending it out to all the studios, he put it online. So I'm just mentioning these as just little options, not to say like, here's the secret to being successful, because everyone's doing this stuff, but it's about leveraging their stuff. I talked about this again yesterday, but there are so many amazing artists, far talented, more than I'll ever be, or than a lot of people I know, but they're sitting secretly in a studio, and the owner of the studio is laughing the entire time. They're like, I'm paying this person $50,000 a year, and they have no idea the value of themselves because they don't go and show off or leverage their stuff or do anything. So, in other words, they're happy being complacent in their job, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the minute you start thinking about, well, what if I wanted to make my own commercial? What if I wanted to direct my own feature film? These are all things you can do. I've got so many friends now who are directing feature films in Hollywood with Michael B. Jordan and all these other big actors because they put together a short film in their spare time because they did something else that got someone's attention. They went on Vimeo and published a thing, and now Neil Blomkamp's producing their movie. This is the kind of stuff that happens just from doing a 3D animation that caught the attention of someone. You never know what could happen. So when I think about this, I think about not only about getting out of my comfort zone and leveraging everything, but the result is that it isn't just getting attention from people. If you're able to start to be more aggressive, start to hustle, start to think of, now I've done this, what's next? You can start to have multiple income streams, because maybe you work on a commercial, you're like, okay, I'm going to put out the models that I made because I own the rights to them. I'm going to sell them on TurboSquid. I'm going to put them on Gumroad. I'm going to put these out for free, and other people will download them. But then they'll know who I am and maybe hire me for other stuff. You never know what can happen, and it's all because you decided to make some models, put them online. One of my friends, Mitch Gates, he always described, this is way before this stuff became popular, but he loved to describe just putting models in TurboSquid was extra pocket money. And for him, it meant that every month you get a check for a couple $100. I look at me. I started putting out some models, some assets, bit of like few training DVDs, and it meant that after a while I started to look at that as my income stream instead. So in other words, all the freelance work, all the main work I did, that would just go to the bank, and then I'd live very very tight on the little bit of money that landed in my PayPal account. But those sorts of mindsets can change everything. So there are so many ways that you can leverage all these things. Putting out your artwork, not just as a commercial, but then being able to put it out online, put it on ArtStation, do turntables of your models, all these little things. They're little tiny hacks, but this is stuff that draws attention to you. But maybe you could go and render out print resolution posters of your work. Look at Raf Grazzetti, look at Boss Logic, all those guys. Like, they're doing personal work that they now sell as 3D prints or doing as portraits that people can buy a picture of the print. There's all these different things that people are doing that you could leverage as money. And money is one thing, but not all of us are looking to, get cash and sell all that stuff. But that again is one other thing that can happen. The main thing is that the more that we leverage our stuff, the more that we're gaining traction, the more that we start to think of what next. It means that I finish a project, I can go to the next studio and say, hey, I just did this thing, give me the opportunity to work on your project next, and start to use the clout of, let's say Avengers Endgame as one I just finished, comes out next week. I could then go to a studio and say, hey, I worked on Avengers Endgame, and negotiate a $5, a $10, a $20 bump per hour. You can leverage this, and each and every win that you have, go to the next studio and ask for a pay rise. The thing is, like, I'm just giving examples of all this stuff, but it means that you can get PR and attention and clout. You can get more job offers because people now know that you're Bay Rate, you created Golem. You could be getting awards, which then you leverage to say, well, hey, I'm an Emmy Award winning person. If you hire me staff on your team, then you get the shop around that we have an Emmy Award winning artist on our team. So there's things that make you more valuable to certain people, and therefore you can leverage all of that. The whole point is to be aggressive and to always look at what the next phase is, and then keep that iteration loop happening. So to think about it this way, I think the main thing is with our careers to start to pick and choose our jobs, and we can't do that in the beginning. But this is where I'm saying, in the beginning, saying, now what? What's next? How do I leverage this? What can I do with the hard work that I've done? Putting out models, 3D prints, doing articles, doing interviews, putting out YouTube videos and breakdowns, posting your work on CG Talk or ArtStation, whatever and however you want to do it. There's infinite ways to do this stuff. Maybe make your video and then say, well, I've got the 3D models. Why don't I put it into Unreal and showcase it off? Or why don't I put out these photogrammetry models for others to download? Why don't I put it into VR? Like, you never know what you can do, but the whole point is that by doing this, you're gaining clout. You're gaining experience. You're getting a chance that people value you a lot more than everyone else because you're looking at how you can leverage the stuff. The whole point is that you want to get to a point where you can pick and choose projects. You want to be able to be grateful that you're employed, but not just at the same time grateful that someone is able to hire you. Instead, you want to get to a point in your career that you can literally be able to walk into a studio and say, hey, I worked on the Golden Gate Bridge, that Grim Reaper hanging over the edge. I'd love to work for your studio and do something similar to that. once you're able to pick and choose projects, that's where the real next level is. So for a lot of us, we can start to think, okay, well, what do I want to do? What's the freedom maybe that I want to have in my career? Maybe that means that I want to take on jobs that pay a lot of money. Maybe the jobs suck. Maybe the jobs are not fun at all, but they pay. And that can always be one lever. In other words, I do a couple of jobs that suck. I hate them to death, but these give me enough money that the next few months I can go and do stuff that I actually care about. One of my friends, she works at Allan in London, and she's a matte painter. She literally travels the world and goes on these like crazy vacations, and she just puts together matte painting packs. In other words, she takes lots of reference photos, sets it all up, very high quality, and she creates these assets and sells them and makes a lot of money. And it means that everywhere she goes, whether it's Scotland, whether it's, who knows, Utah, she can use this as a way to actually pay for her to travel, have fun, have a paid vacation that's actually profitable. And on top of that, she's still going back to ILM and doing her thing. So you're able to leverage these things. And when you do jobs that pay, it means you have freedom later on. The worst thing we want to be in is we're in a job we hate and we have to be there because we've got no other choice. So that's why I think it's really important that we do some jobs that suck, but they give us the money to have the freedom for later on. A lot of us want to do the jobs that we like, but maybe not all of them actually pay as much as we want. Okay, so I'm hoping that makes sense. Does it make sense for you guys? We want to be able to create our own freedom. So money is one thing I think is really important. To segue for a second, I created a system which I called 363, which was looking at my career over and over and over. I pretty much broke it down to 6 months of the year I would work on shitty jobs, or jobs at least that I negotiate a really good pay rate for, that mightn't have been fun. They weren't for me, they weren't they weren't fulfilling, but they paid well. And it meant that I had 6 months of high paying jobs, which meant that I had the freedom the rest of the year to do whatever I wanted. So this didn't mean that it was a straight 6 months. It meant that maybe 3 weeks on, a week off, 3 weeks on, a week off, whatever it is, but it accounted to 6 months. From there, I would do 3 months of just vacation, which meant, I could work on my own stuff, I could work on a course, I could just do talks or travel, relax, sleep in, watch cartoons, whatever it might be. But that meant I actually had a life. I actually had balance in my life. But it also meant that the last 3 months, so in other words, 3 months, 6 months, 3 months, 363, it meant that I would be focusing on the bigger picture. So, in other words, I wanted to think about, where do I want to be down the line? I think that all of us have a short film we want to do, or maybe we want to get experience working in a different area, change careers, and we can't change careers because we got to pay the bills and we need a job. Whatever it is that we want to do down the line, our someday goal, most of the time we're like, I really want to do this, but then we're like, yeah, I want to launch my own company, whatever it might be, but it's just like, I'll do it next year because I can't right now, I'm too busy, or I don't have the money, or whatever it might be. So this is where it's really critical for all of us to think about, doing the 6 months. That is our investment. That is the money to fund us doing the things that we're really passionate about. So let's say we want to make a short film because one day we want to direct a feature film. This is the chance that one day I want to work at Pixar, directing next to Brad Bird and all these other great guys. How do I do that? How do I ever find time when I'm working crazy hours and I don't have a life and I'm just doing all these things? So 363 means by putting in 6 months of just working my ass off on jobs that mightn't be fun, maybe doing ArcViz in Qatar or wherever it might be, that's one of my students, what he did, then after that, that's going to fund us to allow us to then focus 3 months on the things that we want to do. And like I said, it's not 6 month blocks, it's 6 months over that span of the year. So maybe I work 3 months and then I take a month off, or, and then I use that month to work on a short film. But the whole point is that I'm making time for the bigger picture. Because right now you're going to be in the rat race, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over. And we're going to look back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years and be like, fuck, where did the time go? What am I doing? Like, I wanted to do all these things and now I'm older and now I'm making excuses as to why it's too late. When all we need to do is carve out that time, which we're like, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have whatever. Fine, make the time. Put in a request to your job saying, I'm going to take a month off unpaid, but I want to come back to my job. Is that okay? And if you do it right, of course they're going to keep you, because A, they're not paying. This is what Dave Clayton at Weta did. A, they're not paying for you. You've saved up your money from doing that 6 months of hardcore work. B, they're not losing you, at least not yet. They don't know your bigger picture. But you're never going to get to where you want. I had so many opportunities that I kept turning down because I didn't have time. There's so many things I wanted to do. My mentorship would have never happened if I hadn't been able to commit and say, you know what, I'm taking a couple of months off. I took a 4 months and worked entirely on creating my mentorship. That would have never ever happened because every year I'm like, I want to make a mentorship. 3 years go by and I'm like, I still want to make a mentorship, but where am I going to find the time? I'm working on 7 feature films most of the time. How do I do it? You got to make the time. So I worked my butt off. I saved a lot of money. I went to Blur. I killed myself on Halo. I finished that. I had a chunk of savings, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go work on my mentorship. And if it's a failure, then I'll go back to freelancing, the month after. But if it's going really well, then I've got to think about how to leverage all this stuff. So again, we got to pick and choose those projects, but more importantly, work on the sucky ones to finance the ones that we really want to do, whether they're personal or not. But 363 is a good way to kind of look at how you want to split up your year cumulatively, if that makes sense. So again, guys, leave as many questions as you want. I'm going to do a bit of Q&A at the very end, and I won't go for too much longer, but I want to get into the how, because I think this will be really important. So, like I said, being able to pick the jobs that pay is one thing, but also think about clout. So in other words, there might be projects that are really high profile that might get us a lot of attention, which means that we can leverage that down the line. If you think that, let's say you work in a smaller country, a smaller studio, smaller industry, and then you got to go work on Star Wars 9. Do you think that the next few projects that you work on, that might have some clout? Do you think you could negotiate a bit more money by being able to say, hey, I worked on Star Wars at ILM or wherever? One of my friends worked on Titanic. He's an Australian, went to Digital Domain in LA, worked on Titanic, and then came back to Australia, and for the rest of his life, he was known as Titanic Boy. So we had a lot of clients from Konami and other Japanese studios coming in, and they'd always request Titanic Boy. But it meant that he was always in high demand. It meant that he always got a lot of good money because people knew him as, you're the guy who worked on Titanic, that award-winning James Cameron movie. So there are times, again, like once we get to the next level, we can think of what next. We can start to target jobs that might have a lot of clout. They might be high profile, and even just that one or two might be enough to be able to get you work for the rest of your career. So the outcome is that because of that, you could also be doing a lot of PR with it, things like that. So I look at Avengers Infinity War as a good example. Digital Domain and Weta did amazing work on that, and we didn't really hear anything about it. We just kind of saw all the great work and nothing really came out. But award season came by when the Visual Effects Society Awards, the Oscars were all happening in February and March. That's when Kelly Port and all the other guys at Digital Domain, you would see their name everywhere. YouTube was blowing up with all the making of videos, all this stuff, because suddenly they had this amazing movie that they wanted to win awards or whatever they wanted to do with it. They could do that because they would leverage this high profile thing. And you got to think of it that way, that suddenly you're going to have your name associated with that. So clout is another thing that, again, can allow you to get a lot more opportunities. Again, if you're applying for a job and there's 20 other people applying for the job, and then you mention at the beginning of your email, I worked on Avengers, that is probably going to prick up some ears and get people's attention, right? So these are ways that you can stand out and then leverage that as much as you can. So another thing that people should look at with their career is relationship. I've talked about this in 2 days ago. I did one on networking and the value of that. But in general, you got to think of it in ways that, how can I leverage this? If I go to a job, maybe I'm picking the job not because it's high profile, not because the money's really good. Maybe the money sucks. Maybe it's for free. It's a passion project. But maybe it's a chance to work with someone in a fashion that you wouldn't usually get to. Let's say that some big director said, hey, I don't have any money right now, but I really love a hand on this short film. It's a passion project, and I'll make sure to give you a credit. But the cool thing is you get to work with me for 3 months. There are some of us who are going to be like, hell no, I don't work for free. And, I think there's a difference, and I want to talk about this at some point a lot more in depth, but there's a big difference between, I'll put it this way. I I do pretty well in my career. Okay, at this point, freelancing is usually about mid six figures. So I'm saying that because there are jobs that I do for free all the time, and I wouldn't do that if I didn't see the value in it. If I'm making, a couple of grand a day, sometimes with freelance work, and again, I'm not saying money to impress you or to brag or anything like that. I'm saying that because most people are not going to tell you this stuff. So I want to be very clear about you can make a lot of money, but even when I'm making a lot of money freelancing, I do free jobs all the time. Chris Doe over at the Future or Blind Design in LA on Olympic in Santa Monica. We've collabed on a few projects together where I've come in and I'm happy to do it for free because I know that if we land it, that could be a couple $100,000. So I'm not thinking small. I'm not thinking about, hey, I got to make sure I get my hourly wage. I think that's important for a lot of us to think about the importance of thinking bigger. So the big difference when working for free is that you don't want to be taken advantage of. If you're going to go work at a animation studio and they say, we don't want to pay you, or we're going to pay you minimum wage, screw that. If you know you're being taken advantage of because the KPI, the thing that you're trying to work for, is money, then you want to make sure you're getting what you're worth. The difference is if you're thinking bigger, if you're thinking, hey, I got a chance to work with James Cameron, following him around for a week and I get paid peanuts, that's fine. If you know that, hey, I'm going to leverage that, I'm going to get a chance for James Cameron to know who I am. We're going to be on a first name basis and I can leverage that down the line. So I mention this because there are plenty of jobs in my career that I've taken on that weren't for the clout. They weren't cool projects. I worked on one with Thomas Siegel, who's the DP on, I forget what the hell he's done recently. Maybe one of you guys can IMDb it, but Thomas Siegel is like one of the biggest directors of photography in the world in Hollywood. And I worked on his short film. I got paid, but it wasn't great. And it definitely wasn't interesting. I won't say it was about, but yeah, it was kind of embarrassing. It was really shitty. But the thing is that Thomas Siegel, one of the biggest DPs in the world, now knows who I am. The Scion commercial I did for Amazon, that director went and did more car commercials. He's a car commercial guy. I ended up going to freelance at a bunch of studios, and he'd see that I'm working there, and I'd be involved in every single meeting. So me going from being an effects artist, working in Maya on a car commercial, doing some fun stuff, but nothing high profile, in the sense that I wasn't reinventing the wheel. I did a bunch of particles, whoop-de-doo. But suddenly, every single time that director, who is very high profile, comes into a studio, they're like, hey, Allan, come sit in these meetings. How is that going to affect the perception of that studio and the fact that maybe they'll want to hire me more often? Again, not saying this to brag if that's what it comes off as. I'm saying this because this is the sort of thing that if you have those relationships can give you a lot of opportunity. So a good example of this would be one of my friends. He worked with Robert Zemeckis, worked on a bunch of his animated feature films at Image Movers Digital in San Francisco. So he worked with Zemeckis pretty closely. Zemeckis got to know who he is. Kevin and his best friend Ryan, I had him on the podcast, they went and they started their own visual effects studio. Most visual effects studios for the first 3 or 4 years struggle. They're barely getting by. They're trying to prove themselves, trying to get work every way they can. Guess what happened with that studio? Robert Zemeckis is like, hey, I'm going to go and make some live action films. The last one I did was Castaway. It was a long time ago, but now I'm going to go and I'm going to make this movie called Flight with Denzel. Who will I get to do it? And this isn't, let's give Kevin and Ryan like a little bit of work. Kevin and Ryan, who at the time we were like 8 people or something like that, like 8 people in a small studio. He's like, let me give you my entire feature film, 400 plus shots, which we couldn't even handle, but we grew to handle it. Think about that, like having that relationship, working with some director, suddenly that's where the opportunities are down the line. That this feature film director is literally giving your studio all this work. So Atomic Fiction at the time was a tiny little place in Emeryville, just down the street from Pixar. 8 people in an office. I come back, they bought a second building because they had so much overflow. They have so many feature films going on. We're doing Transformers, we're doing Flight, all these other cool things, and it's just growing. They just got bought out by Method in Montreal, and they're huge. So another one of my friends, Chris, worked very closely with Neil Blomkamp. He worked with him on a movie and then quit his job and went and worked directly with Neil Blomkamp. From there, ILM literally is hiring him to be the head visual effects supervisor for all of ILM in Canada because, well, he's a super talented guy, but it also helped because he had that relationship with that director. It meant by hiring him onto ILM as the highest VFX soup in the entire studio, it means that if Neil Blomkamp wants to come and work with Chris, they got to go and work with ILM, right? So again, relationships are everything. So sometimes picking these projects that that director maybe down the line is going to go and direct something really big, you never know what could happen. So again, that's something that I'll pick and choose projects based on that. I'm trying to give examples here just to kind of point out that most of us, when we pick our jobs, we're coming in and we're saying, I'll do whatever. Instead of thinking, you know what, I've got finite time in my career, I'm going to make the most of it, I'm going to level up aggressively, I'm going to do whatever I can. So once I'm at that point in my career, I want to start to pick and choose projects based on what's next for me, what are my goals, how is this job going to get me there. There are so many times that I missed out on Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, like all these other big films because I took on a crappy commercial. A good example is George of the Jungle 2. I did that instead of The Matrix 2, just because of stupidity, because I wasn't prioritizing, because it was more convenient for me. But if I start to think, maybe if I hold out and look at other opportunities, maybe there's something better down the line. So one thing is that something's going to be good for the resume. In other words, I think a lot of us are going to think, if I go work at Digital Domain, ILM, and Ubisoft and Sony, that might be good for the resume, right? So strategically thinking ILM doesn't pay as well as other studios, that's because they know that they're ILM and they've got the pick of the litter. So ILM, typically people will take a pay cut, they go work there, and then they get a massive pay enhancement or pay bump at the next studio because now they've worked at ILM, they're proven, and everyone's going to hire them. They're going to be in high demand. So thinking bigger rather than thinking smaller, you're able to go work at a studio because you know that's going to be good on the resume. The other thing is to think about your demo reel. Maybe early in your career, it'd be cool to get some shots of Hellboy or something on your reel. So these are the sorts of things you got to think about because it's as simple as that one or two projects could be the thing that will get me every project for the rest of my life. I mentioned this yesterday in the live stream I did, and for everyone who's just coming in, I'm going to be doing live streams every day. But yesterday I mentioned how I worked on Avengers Endgame. And Avengers Endgame I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't worked at God of War. And God of War I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't worked on Blade and all these other things. Because what was the consistent thing that happened there? I worked on Blade, and we needed to create these ashing vampires. So whenever a vampire got killed, he would turn to ash, fall apart, and that looked really cool in the reel, right? So we killed 120 vampires for Blade, and because of that, every single person's calling up saying, I need to have my creatures fall apart and turn to ash. And it got to the point where I turned down projects because as soon as they mentioned vampire, I'm like, all right, fuck it, I'm out because I'm not doing any more stupid vampires because my entire reel started to look like it's all vampires. The thing is that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means that I'm going to corner my little part of the industry because if someone needs vampires, they're going to think of me. Then God of War came around, everyone is doing the same thing. So each one led to another thing. So if I'm getting a lot of car commercials on my reel and I'm in Detroit 10 years ago, 5 years ago, there'd be a lot of work that I could probably get because people need cars over there. In New York City, if I was doing a lot of motion graphics, maybe that would lead to work. So the people who did the titles, Imaginary Forces for Stranger Things, everyone else wants retro stuff for their stuff because Stranger Things was so cool. So they go to Imaginary Forces and they're like, we want more of this. So sometimes picking projects based on it doesn't pay well, the relationships with a crappy studio, it won't do good PR, but this will be really cool in my reel. Maybe that's the lever, maybe that's the KPI, the key performing indicator that you want to focus on. Because having that one or two vampire shots on your reel one day might lead to working on Avengers Endgame, right? So your demo reel is one thing. The last two things, I want to start to wrap this up. I'll say one is awards. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I know so many artists who are able to negotiate more money because they've got an Oscar, because they've got an Emmy, VES award, whatever it might be. And it's good to clock that stuff up because, I'm sure you guys have read some of my bios where if I'm writing a chapter in a book, I'll do the cheesy credentials, but I'll say Allan McKay, Emmy award-winning VFX supervisor. You know, as much as it's fun to throw clout or credits around, that's the sort of thing that will give you instant authority. So whenever it comes to speaking at events, stuff like that, you know, it's uncomfortable initially to do that stuff. I've done it so long now, I don't even think about it. But that sort of thing is going to allow you to get, the more money, the projects you might want to get, whatever it might be. And studios are willing to pay you more potentially because they get to show that off too. When I went to do Avengers, I keep bringing up Avengers. I guess I'm just excited about it coming out next week. But one of the other guys had an Emmy, and and the jokes began the day one. It's like, let's bring him in and make him fight, But that's just it. Like, it does make you stand out from other people. So there are going to be jobs that maybe the Super Bowl's coming around. Again, God of War was a good example. Usually in December, we'll start to look at projects like, again, once you get to a certain point in your career, you can email people, and you got to do it nicely because I don't want to be a dick and say, what are you doing? Kind of like prove to me that this is worth my time. So I do got to do it nicely because, again, I don't want to sound like a complete asshole, but I kind of do need to really be picky about where my time goes. So I'm not taking on a job unless I know that it's going to be really cool. Bring up Avengers one more time, but I mentioned this yesterday. I turned it down because they wouldn't tell me what it was. I signed 3 NDAs, and then they're like, yeah, we're still not comfortable telling you. So, it's tricky. It's really tricky thinking about that stuff because you've got finite time, and when you get to a point where you are fortunate enough, lucky enough, you put in the time that you are getting to pick and choose your projects. You got to pick and choose the right ones. But usually in December or January, when I'm talking to studios, I will say, hey, love to chat with you sometime. If you can give me a heads up, like what project are you doing? What are the big challenges? I'd love to know a bit more about it, and we can talk, in the next couple of days on the phone. That's kind of however you want to word it, but that's my way of kind of saying, can you give me a sneak peek as to what this is? And if they say, yeah, we're doing this flying logo commercial, then no thank you. But if they say, let's send you the storyboards, and it's the best freaking and most amazing commercial or whatever it might be that I've ever seen in my life, like there's been those that God of War is still one of my favorites that when I see it, I'm just like, wow, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And maybe it is. You're like, wow, this could win some awards next year. This could be at the Super Bowl and could be the one that everyone talks about. So there are going to be certain ones that will rise above all the others that maybe win awards or whatever it might be, but you can pick and choose those by just fishing around and asking people. You can say, hey, I'm talking with a few studios. I'd love to know a bit about what you got going on, and we can get on the phone after that or whatever. But there's plenty of different ways you can word it without sounding like, validate how good your commercial is to me. Two other things I'll say. One is picking and choosing projects based on experience. So I know so many people, and I've done it myself, where maybe I want to get to the next level. Like for me, maybe I've been working in the industry, or you've been working in the industry for a few years, and you're a 3D artist, but you want to move into effects. I've got friends who've been lighting artists, they want to be effects. Maybe it is that you do a job where the pay isn't good, the relationships, the product isn't good, but this will be a credited effects position, which no one else would have given you the opportunity to do. This would be a chance for you to segue into something that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So you got to think that maybe it's the experience. Like maybe you want to be a VFX supervisor one day, and the way to do that is to get experience on set. You can negotiate that. You can say, next project I do, I'd love to come and work on your job, but the only way I'll do it for the pay and the schedule that you guys are thinking about is if you can let me follow along on set and get some experience, tagging along with the VFX soup. I'd love to get more experience in that area. You can do that. You can leverage these different things. So for you might think, hey, the pay isn't very good, but if I point that out to him and say, look, usually I charge 50 an hour, I know you're only paying 40 or 30 or 20, whatever it might be. I'm willing to do it on this project, but to make it worth my while, because I'm not getting my usual rate, what I'd love is the opportunity to tag along on set, and as well as sit in some of the meetings, because down the line, my bigger goal is I want to work as a VFX supervisor. So does it sound fair to you that instead of me getting the rate that I feel I'm worth, would you be willing to let me help out on set and sit in some of the meetings and get more experience in this area? Even if you got a full-time job, like this could be a chance where you say, like, look, I want to do this because essentially it's going to make you more valuable to them down the line if they're grooming you to be a VFX soup. So these sorts of things happen all the time. I've done it so much. I've got friends, like one of my friends who is one of the founders of Zerply. If you guys are aware, it's the #1 place on the internet for you to put your demo reel. They work closely with ILM and Sony and all these other big studios with helping you guys get jobs. And one of the founders, back when he was like 27, I think, he's about to leave to move to London. And what he did is he negotiated, hey, next job I do at the studio we're at, can I be a lead on the project? Mm-hmm. And he's looking at it as kind of like it was very overdue and he should get the experience. But really what he wanted to do was he wanted to leave that studio as an effects lead. Sorry, I keep saying effects lead. I'm just conditioned to say that as a lead, like a lead artist. So as a lead generalist. But he wouldn't have gotten that experience if he hadn't asked for it. And on top of that, by doing that, he then could leave that studio and everywhere he went, he was accredited lead artist. So he could then negotiate in London lead artist rates, whereas he couldn't have before. So that is a strategic position where by him saying, give me a lead position or negotiating it, on-set experience, once you've been knighted as a VFX soup, then you can start getting more VFX soup work on smaller projects and work your way up. But you can never be a VFX soup on a big movie without getting that initial experience. So sometimes you got to be strategic with the jobs you're doing. Again, I'm hoping this is making sense, but it's all about you've been doing your job. Now what? Now it's time to look for phase 2, phase 3. Phase 3 should be about trying to pick and choose the projects that are going to really move the needle. They're going to be the ones that are going to get you to the next level. So one of the ones, I'm going to leave this as the last one, and then we'll do a bit of quick Q&A. So if you guys have questions, leave some questions now, and I'll try to get to what I can. But think about it this way. If you were to pick jobs that didn't pay well, they weren't going to win any awards, they weren't going to be good in the demo reel, they weren't going to get any clouts, the experience, it's a shitty title, all the things that I've mentioned, they're none of that at all. Maybe that job doesn't have any of those things, but what it does have is location. So, in other words, I was 17 years old, a good example, I got offered to go to Portugal and work there. And the job was like stereoscopic 3D animated cartoon or something. And you got to think this is like 1998, so 3D animation, like animated TV series were not good. I didn't take the job in the end, my visa took too long, but you could think of that as a lifestyle thing. I could go live in Madeira, the small little island in Portugal, and I think of like how much different my life would be. Like living in freaking Portugal, that would be amazing, right? That'd be such an amazing life experience to live. Whereas at the same time, maybe I take a job in New York, and I've done that. I go to New York, and suddenly you get paid to fly out, or even if it's in your own pocket, however it's going to be, going to work on a project in New York City. And again, being smart, thinking, okay, I'm here, now what? In other words, what's the next phase? What now, what now, what now? This is a chance where it's like, great, I'm in New York, time to start emailing all the other studios, especially when, let's say you are working on something cool. You can say, hey, I'm in New York, I'm doing this game cinematic for, Tronic or Eyeball or whoever, PsyOp. Do you guys have, 10 minutes? I'd love to swing by and just get a tour of your studio. You can do that. There's 100 different ways you could reach out to people. You could just go on a forum and say, who's in New York City? Let's all get together for beers. I'd love to chat about, my experience living in Brazil or Australia or whatever. And there's going to be people who are like, I like 3D, let's all talk 3D. My students, like, they keep trying to get like Skype sessions going just because a few of them are just like, I want to talk about 3D all day long, and others do too. So people love to talk about what they do for a living, what you're passionate about. So like, you're always going to find those people. And even just going and having beers with other people, you could say, hey, can I swing by your studio and get like have a look around or meet the producer or whatever? Like, you have so many opportunities when you're in that pool of people. I mentioned this the other day, but one of my students, he's in my mentorship, and I told him, like, just go to Vancouver, just get yourself to Vancouver and hustle like a motherfucker. Just get there and things will happen. So he ends up getting there. He emailed me a few weeks or months ago, and he's like, "Hey, Allan, I'm in Vancouver, and I hustled like a motherfucker. I just got a job at Method, waiting for my visa." So that was one of the things that happened that was so big, was that just by being in proximity, all these opportunities started to happen. Okay, so I'll just mention that Monday, I guess it's the weekend now. So like last Monday, he just started his job at Method, and there's so many other stories similar to that. So again, proximity is everything. So imagine, and I'll end it here, but you could negotiate a job where the location is the main thing. I went to LA. I got to LA. I did a crappy game cinematic. I was a lead on it. I met a lot of cool people, but it was a really bad experience. I was working crazy hours. I was pretty miserable. The main thing to think about with this, though, is that when I got to LA, do you think I went and did my job and I'm like, "Thank you very much, going to go back to Australia now"? Every lunchtime, I'm going to Blur Studio, I'm going to DD, I'm going to R&H, I'm going to Sony, I'm getting tours of all the studios, I'm meeting everyone, I'm handing my reel around, I'm having lunches with everyone, I'm going out for beers in every single area, getting to know everyone, I'm meeting up with the Autodesk, I'm going to SIGGRAPH, I'm doing everything I can in that small amount of 8 weeks or whatever that I'm there. I'm going to make the most of it. So what happens at the very end of that? I finish the job, and I've got a few weeks left before I could go back to Australia. I go to another studio, I work my ass off, I make sure I make an impression on everyone, I do everything I can to make sure I'm an integral part of the team, I'm writing tools and doing effects, everything I can to leave an impression. And what happens at that point? The owner comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder, he's like, "Hey, would you be interested in working on Blade? Would you be interested in helping make the pipeline?" And at that point, I go back to Australia with chills. I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to go work on Blade and all these other things." Going back to Australia, do I leave it there? No. I went and talked to Frantic Films. I met Chris Bond. This was in 2004. There was like a massive blackout that week, and I actually didn't get to see Chris because half of New York had a blackout for like a day. I'm not sure if you guys remember. But yes, the email, everything, we couldn't communicate. But go back to Australia and called him up. And the whole time I'm in Australia waiting for my visa, I'm working on Paycheck, Scooby-Doo 2, and a few other projects. But I'm working on cool stuff. So just by going on a trip to LA every single day, every single night, I'm creating all these opportunities. So that way, by the time I go back, I'm set for the rest of my life. I come back when my visa's ready, and I work my ass off. Then I go to Blur, then I do this, then I do that, then I launch my own studio. All of that is because I moved to a certain city, and I leveraged that to my advantage. So the job sucked, the pay sucked, the pay was so bad. I was pretty much traumatized from the project. It was that bad. I look back, that was the second worst project of my entire 25 years of working in 3D, was the job in LA, the first one I ever did. But the opportunities, I look back, I would never change a thing because of what I did while I was there. So just to recap, like I went through a lot. I know we've talked for a lot for an hour. I apologize, but I wanted just to talk about the fact that most of us get very stagnant in our career. We fight so hard to get to where we want to be, and then from there, we just kind of like taper off and do our own thing and just kind of settle. And we just kind of float around. We're reactive, right? We just kind of expect everyone else to promote us and notice all of our hard work, and it doesn't happen that way. Everyone's focused on themselves. They're not focused on you. So we got to look at how to leverage that, okay? So just to recap everything in 10 seconds, everything we do should be always about what next. Every job we pick as we move forward, we try and pick them or ask or request, "Hey, I'd love to do this, but can I also get experience working on set," or whatever it might be. So the jobs we either do them for money because they'll create freedom down the line by having savings to then do the things that we might not be able to do because we're always trying to chase a paycheck. So we think bigger. We think do the shitty jobs now because we'll save up money to do the better jobs down the line. Or we do it for clout, in other words, to get PR and get attention, which we can use to leverage money, whatever we want to do. Maybe we do it for the fact that it's for relationships, to build relationships, to be able to get the jobs we want down the line. Like I said, Kevin managed to launch his own studio, had a 400 shot movie right off the bat, which won all these Academy Awards. Chris went to ILM, where ILM literally made him the head supervisor for all of ILM Canada, because he's super talented, but also because he had a relationship with another director. Relationships are everything. On top of that, for your demo reel, because that might land you lots of jobs, relocating, as I mentioned before, is a really critical one, because that could create all these opportunities for you. At the same time, for rewards or for experience, do this job, because this job they'll train you in another software package. I know a guy, oh man, I can't remember his name now. It's been like 15, 20 years. Zelko Dejanovic. He was a really famous Quantel operator. So Quantel was like the old school compositing back in the day, but he knew there'd be a huge demand for Flame and Inferno compositors. So he takes a job at a studio he wasn't really interested in working in. They trained him up in Flame, because they're like, wow, we got Zelko, the most amazing compositor in Australia. As soon as he got trained up enough that he's sufficient in Flame, he quits, goes freelance, charges $1,200 an hour. Okay, it's insane, right? But he was able to do that because he now could leverage that. So that's the sort of stuff you got to think about. Is like, what is next in my career? Like, what was I doing before I got stagnant? Am I stagnant now? If so, then what can I do? What should be the things that I'm targeting to get me out of this bubble? But more importantly, every job that I do moving forward, how can I use it to level up my career? So I hope you guys got a lot from this. I'm going to do a quick Q&A. And yes, that's correct, $1,200 an hour. That you got to keep in mind is for, literally the highest in demand Flame compositor back in 2000 or 99. Very different world now than it was back then. But back then, yeah, crazy money for compositing in Inferno and Flame and Henry and Smoke. So yeah, I'll do a quick Q&A and I'll wrap it up there. But a couple of things I'm just going to quickly mention. I mentioned this earlier, but it's going away pretty soon. But I still have a 18-hour live action visual effects course you can get at vfxcourse.com. So if someone wants to leave a link to that in the comments, thanks John for doing that earlier. So the reason for that is it's something I wanted to share with you guys. I won't be having it up for too much longer. I've got some new training coming out, but you can get a 8-video class on doing a whole live action visual effects shot, all the 3D assets, footage, everything else. It's all free. It's just at vfxcourse.com. So that is something really cool. The next 5 days, I'm also going to be, on top of doing live streams every single day, I'm also going to be putting up Tyflow training, as well as some Phoenix and other stuff like that. I'm collabing with some really amazing animators and modelers on a new free training course I'm going to be doing pretty soon. One word, Thanos. So we got something really cool happening. This has been months in the making, and it's finally coming together. So yeah, there's lots of cool stuff coming. Main thing is going to be putting out a new tutorial tomorrow and every other day moving forward for the next week. On top of doing live streams, there's a lot of stuff happening. So I'll do a quick Q&A. What's up, Tim? What's up, John? Hi, Sherwin. All right, so any questions you guys have, I'm going to quickly go through these. Cool. So Alex, you're asking, can I talk about pipeline design? So I'm going to do a talk pretty soon about for YouTube on the visual effects industry and all the bits and pieces, how they work together. But if you want to get a bit more specific about what your questions are around pipeline, Alex, feel free to do that, and I'll do my best. George was saying, damn, 1200, I remember doing Henry and Harry's. Yeah, that was crazy back then, for sure. I'll just say this, because this is kind of interesting. One of my friends, Glenn Cohn, he's a director now, but he was a Quantel compositor back in the day, and I remember him going to London, and he's telling me that he got flown over first class, and literally, I almost didn't believe him. Literally every single night, studios would take him out for drinks, wine him and dine him, pay for all his expensive food, the most expensive places. They pay for everything and just make sure he's having a good time. And at the time, me being a 3D artist, I was making $500 a week. Yeah, I was in disbelief. I'm like, no one does that. That's insane. And I look back now, and it's just people do that. But again, you got to put in the hard yards. If you're not doing what I would have just mentioned, if you're not doing that stuff, then you probably don't get to experience that, because you've got to build that clout. You got to build that need. You got to build those relationships. You got to move all those levers that these live streams are all about. But now I look back, and it all happens. I won't I won't say anything just because it'll sound like I'm bragging, but the sky's the limit. You can have whatever you want, but you've got to get out of the barrel crabs that we're all in. Because right now, I think most of us think that VFX is volatile, the game industry is like a lot of work and small pay. But the thing is, if you're being careful about your career, it's not. You can have anything you want. You can have jobs that are created for you. You can command the fees that you want, but you got to be strategic. If you're not caring about your career, and this is the big problem, most of us care about what tutorials we're doing to think that that's going to make us better. Um, every successful person I know, it wasn't their skills. They're all talented, but it was everything else that they were doing, their soft skills that got them there. Learning to communicate better, learning to negotiate, learning to be strategic in their careers. So I hope that makes sense. So a couple more. In terms of location, where do you feel is the best place to start or out or look for with Tim? Vancouver is definitely the hotspot these days. You don't need to go where all the work is, but it definitely will help. Just because you're going to be around that pool of people. One of my students, Scanline VFX, has literally like swooped up most of my mentorship students. It's crazy, but one of them was telling me he got a job 4 weeks ago at Scanline, and initially I think he had talked with Scanline a few times, but the thing that really helped was he ended up at a bar and the COO saw his reel. He showed it to him on his iPhone, and that was it. Like it took a little while for it to happen, but the COO, like, he was mentioning his name over and over, like, gotta hire this guy. So that's all it needs to be sometimes. So I'm gonna do a little bit more Q&A. So quite a hex. What are the most important key points with you when you want to pitch a new project, 3D animation, cartoon to investors, given they all might be management people? So if you guys have questions, feel free to fire out as many as you want. Some of these, what I'm going to be doing after this, I'm going to go through and say, hey, this would be a really cool topic to talk about. Like someone the other day was saying, do you think AI is going to disrupt our industry? And I said, yeah, in certain areas. So I'm going to do one and elaborate more on that. Someone was asking about, should artists care about social media? So, I was like, yeah, I'll put together a talk on. I'm gonna do another live stream real quick on my Instagram. I apologize, guys. I value your time, so I'm gonna just do this really really quick. But yeah, someone asking if social media is something that artists should care about. So I did a talk yesterday entirely on branding, and all of these will be available on my YouTube, so you guys are welcome to watch those. I'm going to be doing one on how to get a work permit in the US pretty soon, because that's something that I've got a lot of experience in. I've helped a lot of people. I've mentored people through the visas. I've done podcasts with all the leading lawyers for Canada, UK, New Zealand. I had Peter Jackson and James Cameron's personal immigration lawyer on for that, and also the US. So Amanda Gillespie is one of the number one immigration lawyers in the US. She handles all the O1 visas, which are the rockstar visas. So they're the highest kind of visa you can get. So I've had 2 podcasts with her, and I just recently, sorry, she knows, I just recently reached out to her again just to make sure that there's many changes with Trump and everything. So I'm going to be putting out an article pretty soon, as well as a YouTube video on how to work in the US and all the steps involved. But Alex, with your question about investors and pitching projects, I've got a lot of experience doing that. I'd rather go in depth and actually do a proper talk on that rather than throw you a couple of bullets. And the one thing I'll say about these is the reason they're so long is because I as much as I want to say do these 5 things, without context it doesn't work. So I want to go in depth because I want you guys to have the mindset behind it and the understanding, and then it will work. So I hate when people, just kind of say, to make $1 million, do less, not more. And it's like, well, how does that apply? Stuff like HDRI, making. Okay, yeah. So Mahesh was asking if I can put out some material on how to make HDRIs. If you go to vfxcourse.com, I've got a bunch of lessons around live action visual effects. That is all free, but we go into setting up HDRIs, doing a lot of stuff like that, and from there I'll probably do a few follow-ups on actually how to shoot them and doing stuff like that too. So, alright, switch over to YouTube really quick. I was looking at Facebook. Just really quick, I'm going to just jump over and answer your questions, and then I'm going to end things, but I appreciate your patience. I'm going to get better at doing these, by the way. This is my fourth in 4 days, so I'm doing these every single day. The main thing to keep in mind is that I'll be making them more polished, but I'm also going to try and make these a bit more fluid as well. So I'm just trying to see where... Oh, there's the questions. Okay, so I got all your questions. Thanks, guys. Sorry, a little bit echo. Hey, Allan. So this is Miraji. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. How would a lighter in animation become a director when they tend to only make story artist directors? So one of my friends, Sergio Paez, I was talking with him in Montreal last week. He's a storyboard artist, but he also is a director at Lucasfilm. So, you know, what I find is interesting is you got to look at this actually is exactly what we're talking about in this video. Like, if you want to become a director, sometimes you're gonna have to do jobs that are gonna put you closer to the director. So in other words, if you're in the middle, if you're doing modeling, rigging, stuff like that, you mightn't be able to. I'm gonna just get my face off screen. It's a bit distracting. You mightn't be able to get in front of the director because you're not having that relationship. However, that's not to say that you can't leverage that. So let's say to become a director, maybe you got to know some directors. A good example is Neil Blomkamp, who I mentioned before. He worked with Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson essentially took him under his wing. They were going to make Halo, the movie, and then between Microsoft, Peter Jackson, and the other party, I think it was New Line, everyone got a little bit too greedy, so I think they all wanted like 33% each, so there wasn't really any money left to actually make the film. I'm just doing broad strokes with that answer, but thing is that having that FaceTime doing animatics and previs, that allowed him to get in with that person. Same thing with being animation director. You could target animation short films, or you do have a short film, I should say, but you could also be working with the director and become the go-to person. So I know animators who worked directly with George Miller on Happy Feet, stuff like that. And that was like a really big change, because once the director knows who you are, that's when you can leverage that relationship. So again, relationships are really key. The thing is, you can go make a short film, and this might be a collaboration where you get good animators in, you get other people in, and maybe you just say, I'm going to direct it, here's my concept, there's not much money, I'll give you guys what I can, but main thing is this will be really cool. Sell the movie to those people in the sense that you win them over. That might be all it takes, but you don't need, like, a good example is Matt Groening. Okay, I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but I just want to answer these as quick as I can. Matt Groening couldn't really draw, but he knew how to make good cartoons. So getting the right people who can do those things, you can still make these amazing cartoons like The Simpsons, which is what he made. And even with Seth MacFarlane, other people too. So just keep that in mind, that like, don't ever put yourself in a bucket where you're like, well, I'm a lighting artist, so therefore I can't do any of this. If you're a lighting artist, then you can be finishing shots, which means you could be a scene assembler, which means you could work very closely with a director or something like that, and slowly get that opportunity. A lighting artist is also someone who's going to have a good understanding of how to make things work, so you can transition to being a DP, which again means you're working with a director. So there's all these like 2 degrees of separation from the people who could knight you, take you under their wing, and make you that person. The other thing is just to go out there and make your own thing. Make a short film, then you're directing. Like I said, I've got so many friends who've made a short film. Bagman was one that Josh and John Baker, they made that. Then they ended up making Kin, which had Michael B. Jordan. And so, you know, that's another thing to think about. It's just like short film, Leviathan with Roy Robinson. There's like plenty of my friends who've gone and made a short film. Now they're directing Star Wars or whatever. So Wes Ball, Gareth Edwards, all those guys are 3ds Max people who went and directed big things like Godzilla and Star Wars. So there's so many great questions. So if I don't get to these, I'm going to definitely loop back, but I'll do a couple more. Keep leaving questions. Also, if you can like this video, that would mean the world to me, just again, because I'm going to be looking at, do I do more of these live streams? And I'll only be doing them if I think that this is something that is where I should put my time. So if you guys can hit like, that at least, to me, is just saying, okay, yeah, people are digging this, do more. Yeah, so some of this stuff I'll definitely kind of flesh out more, but Rakesh was saying, sorry, it was wasn't Rakesh, but what do you think of VFX studios in Canada? Canada is now the capital of Hollywood. You know, it isn't Hollywood anymore. It's Hollywood North. So you know, I think it's great. I think it's a bit of a bubble, but right now, as a studio, you've got to be in Vancouver to work with Fox and all of the other big ones. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's one of those things that you could cry about it, but it's just like, look, that's how it is. Go where the work is. But I also think that most people in LA have cried about, you know, all the work going to Canada. Realistically, it's actually going to the world, and I'm excited for that. I live in LA most of the time, but I'm excited that finally the entire planet, whether you're in India, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, like there's work for you now, whereas before it was you had to be in LA, New York, or London. Have you ever dealt with aggressive bosses, toxic workplaces? How do you deal with that? So, by the way, guys, do you guys want me to do a Q&A sometime? Because maybe it'll be fun just to go through a lot of this stuff, because that might be fun just to do a glass of wine and talk about the stuff. I definitely have worked at some toxic places. I mentioned this on the first live stream I ever did. I'll leave this as the last question. I'll do one more after this, and then I'm going to call it quits. But I'll definitely look at these. Like, the more questions you guys ask, the more I'm likely to make like a bigger, more fleshed out talk on that topic. I've worked at some crappy places, definitely, without a doubt. Some that have permanently like affected like me physically. Like my back is got rips all the way through, like herniations. That was my fault. That was my studio. But you know, there's been projects that have like physically. I didn't walk for a year because of that, and that was bad. But I worked at ones that I was sleeping at under my desk for weeks. I had friends come and visit me, and I let them stay at my hotel because I hadn't been in my hotel apart from showering every few days. It was really bad. Like there's definitely places like that. What is an advantage is that the more senior you get, the more smarter you get. So I think for me, I'm always interviewing the studios more than they interview me, and the reason for that is because I I only have finite time, just like with these live streams. I've only got enough time that I want to pick and choose the projects that are right for me. But it also means that you can smell a shitty studio a mile away, because most of the time it's the owners of the studio or the managers that they don't know how to do their job. In other words, they make poor decisions, and because of that, all of us end up working the late hours and the bad conditions. So that's something you got to keep in mind, is that there's going to be shitty places, and unfortunately, as I mentioned with like the beginning of your career, like you're going to eat shit, you're going to have to do some bad places, but you're going to learn from those mistakes, and it's probably going to help you pick and choose better places down the line. More importantly, you know what questions to ask to prevent working at those places again. I went to work at a studio in New York, and I said, how many render nodes do you have? Because I'd learned in the past that I'd go and do a job, and then they didn't have enough render power to actually do it, and it made me look bad because I couldn't do my job. So then those studios would say, well, we have 30. And then I get there and I'm like, no, you've got 30 computers, you've got 0 render nodes, because those computers have people attached to them and they're using it all day long. So then I'd ask like more questions, and bit by bit I would start to learn to ask the right questions that would allow me to, pick and choose the right projects. But like I said, in the beginning you can't be as picky, but it's up to you what your tolerance is going to be. Long term, though, you'll learn to pick the projects and the people you want to work for. And the other thing too is that don't screw up the jobs you're doing. If you're doing a job with someone you like, do a good job. Don't burn that bridge. Don't walk out on them or anything. And you could very well work with the same 3 or 4 studios your entire career, and they could pay you well. They know who you are, so it's not like you're having to prove yourself over and over and over. Like I look at Atomic Fiction, Frantic Films. Those 2 studios, like Frantic isn't around anymore. They got bought by Prime Focus, but yeah, like they were my favorite studios, and I would continue to work for them. Blur, I love. I've definitely worked with them a lot in the past, and I love what they do, and I wouldn't have ever worked with them repeatedly if I didn't, really look up to a lot of the staff there. So 2 more questions. One more question. I'll do one more. So I'm just looking through these. A lot of great questions, guys. I'm gonna. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, CG Friends. I'll do that's his name, not you, CG Friends. I'll do a Q&A later this week for fun. So I'm just looking for one amazing one. I'll do two because Devanshu was saying for someone who doesn't use 3ds Max, if I went to vfxcourse.com and did that free course, would you get value from it? Yeah, I got people who do it in Houdini and Maya. You know, it's a little bit more ambitious, but it's all the same stuff. So when it says create the emitter, you create your emitter in whatever package you want. Create the fluids or whatever. So it's all the same stuff. All right, one more. Let's see. Okay, Daniel's saying I'm currently switching from motion graphics to feature film. What's the biggest challenge I should expect when I get a job in feature film coming from advertising? It really comes down to the studio that you're working for because they're all going to be different. I guess you might get shocked at how many iterations you go through, just because there may be times where you know you're pixel fucking stuff for months and going different directions. Whereas the cool thing about commercials and motion graphics is that it's pretty cutthroat. It means if you hate a job, the job's going to be over in a couple of weeks no matter what. Whereas in feature film, you could be doing the same thing for months sometimes. You know, you get them to the version 999. So I think the main thing is it's good to have a couple of shots because especially there are going to be times where you take on a job and you end up nursing one shot and the shot for whatever reason isn't really working out, and it's very easy for that to kind of weigh down your morale. But if you've got a couple of things, then you can at least get some wins and you know keep moving forward while you're nursing that one shot from hell. But I guess it depends on like what specifically you're doing in feature film. Yeah, I'm just looking at what you're doing. So I mean, if you're doing compositing or if you're doing UX or not UX, sorry, like GUI stuff, motion graphics elements. So yeah, it really depends on what kind of stuff you're doing. But feature film's fun. It's a slower pace a lot of the time, but the output is also a lot bigger. So there's a lot more demand sometimes. I prefer shorter stuff just because it's like a gym. You can get very stagnant doing feature film stuff. So I kind of like that's why ILM they hire so many Blur studio people because Blur tends to be pretty demanding, you know. So like, a lot of my friends, we'd always refer to Blur as the gym because you go to the gym, you work out occasionally just to kind of keep your skills up. So at ILM, like they would hire so many people from there because at Blur you'd be expected to knock out stuff sometimes in half a day, and then you go to ILM where it's like half a month, and so yeah, it's just night and day different. So hopefully it helps. It's kind of hard without getting more context. So you're doing compositing, yeah. Okay. Sorry. Again, that helps a lot. So I'll just quickly end with Daniel's question. But I'll say like if you're going from motion graphics in doing commercials to compositing in feature films, I'd say the biggest thing is going to be that you're going to need to learn to work with teams of people at times because you're going to be knocking out hundreds of shots and sharing that consistency between all of them. But more importantly, there's going to be a lot more technical stuff you're going to have to learn just because I do feel like commercials these days have really stepped up in a lot of ways, but they don't go work a PSYOP and they're using After Effects to comp like everything that they're doing. So, which is nothing wrong with, but you know, some places have pipelines, some places don't. So big thing though is that if you're switching to feature film compositing, is that suddenly you're going to be working with especially in LA, place like that, with a pretty rock solid pipeline where things need to consistently flow back and forth. You got to know all the right LUTs and know that's going to go into DI and all the steps. And again, like a lot of that is consistent with commercials too, but there's definitely a lot more just data. Like maybe you're not compositing in deep, and then you go to Weta, and like all they do is deep. There's a lot of proprietary tools, pipeline, automation. So I think it's just more in general. It's going to be handling a lot more and a lot more just technical things that you might need to learn specific to that studio. So hopefully that helps. But I think there's so much you can learn going to feature film because especially at bigger city studios like London and LA specifically, opposed to New York, let's say, it's just interesting when there's money and schedule behind something to actually really see it through and really do some cool stuff. So yeah, there's two different types of feature films. Sorry, I can hear my fiance sneezing in the other room. Bless you. So I'm losing my train of thought. But yeah, basically there's different places. Some places automate too much, and that can be their downfall. So I feel like you need a place that you're still able to, do like I've worked at places where compositing wasn't allowed to adjust 3D layers. It should be coming from 3D correct. And to me, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. You're burning money doing that. So, again, it just really comes down to the studio and things like that. I hope that helps. I'm going to leave it there, guys. This has been fun. I'll definitely do more. I'm trying to make these shorter, but maybe I'm just going to have to do some Q&A separately occasionally. But I wanted to, just kind of focus on this because I think that there's just a lot around these topics that I'd rather just dump everything out there and you guys make the most of it. But I'm also going to get my assistant, hopefully, to build up some really in-depth notes about these. So I'll try to link to them as well so you can kind of be like, all right, let me just skim through all the key takeaways as well. So if you like this though, do me a favor, share this, just so that way others can get value from it too. The other thing is just to leave a comment, let me know, like if you're on YouTube, like actually leave a physical comment, not in the chat. I'm learning that very quickly because I'll videos that have the chat, but they don't have any comments at all. And the reason for this is because I'm putting out these videos and I want to see if you guys find it valuable. And so the way I'm going to be doing that is I'm going to look at, hey, I did this video today and a lot of people liked it, a lot of people commented, cool, I'll do more. Because I've only got finite time that I can put into things, and for me to do an hour and a half like I did today, yesterday, last couple of days, I'm only going to keep that up if I know that you guys want to see more. So if you can leave a comment on my YouTube video, just in the actual comments letting me know, yes, do more, or more importantly, any questions you have, I'll definitely make sure I do more of these as well. But this has been really cool, guys. Again, I want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this. Thank you for contributing. Appreciate all of you. And yeah, I'll definitely try to respond to a lot of these questions as well. So thanks, Ethan, Manoj, Digital Player, Daniel, Ski, all of you guys. So thanks so much. Kaisenshi, cool guys. Thank you again. I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right.